The veranda of the country house was quiet, almost unbearably so, as if the world had paused to watch. I settled into an old wicker chair, the one with slightly frayed edges and a cushion softened by decades of sun. My eyes wandered across the landscape, each detail etched into memory. The tall pines at the lake's edge swayed gently in a June breeze. The smooth water reflected the sunlight like a silver mirror, and in the distance, the roofs of neighboring houses peeked above the trees. Every blade of grass glimmered in the warm afternoon sun. Every leaf on the apple trees, planted by Elizabeth and me 30 years ago, seemed to shimmer with life. Behind me, the house breathed emptiness. 2 stories of wide rooms and large windows, it had been my pride and joy, the fruit of 3 years of relentless effort. I had designed it with Elizabeth. Every corner, every wall, every beam had passed through my hands. She used to joke that this house contained more of my blood and sweat than of cement. I came here weekly, usually on Wednesdays. I checked plumbing, mowed the lawn, fixed what needed fixing. Sometimes I stayed overnight, but more often I returned to the city apartment before dusk. Staying too long was hard. Too many memories lingered, memories of Elizabeth, of the life we had shared. Elizabeth had passed 4 years ago, taken quickly by pancreatic cancer. Only 3 months from diagnosis to funeral, 42 years together, and then nothing. I could never bring myself to remove her things from the bedroom closet. None of that stayed in the city apartment. There, life was simpler, impersonal, easier. My apartment was on the 6th floor of a sturdy old building downtown, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a living room, and a small east-facing balcony. I had bought it 20 years ago as an investment, renting it out until I moved there after Elizabeth died. The country house, meanwhile, stood mostly empty, holding the echoes of our shared past. I finished my lemonade, set the glass on the small table beside me, and leaned back. All the chores for the day were done, roof inspected, a creaky porch step repaired, overgrown lilacs trimmed. I could have returned to town, but something kept me there. A sense of premonition, perhaps. Something was about to change. My phone rang, shattering the quiet. Tiffany's name lit up the screen. "Hi, Daddy," she said, her voice unusually bright. "Are you in town?" "No, I'm at the country house," I answered, "just getting everything ready for the summer." "That's great," she said. "Jasper and I have been meaning to come visit you this weekend. Can we come up there?" Was surprised. Tiffany rarely wanted to come here in recent years. We usually met in the city at restaurants, where conversations inevitably turned to her plans and subtle hints of financial troubles. "Of course I'd be glad," I said, hiding my surprise. "Saturday?" "Yeah, Saturday's perfect. I'm so homesick, and we have some news." Of course, I thought. Another business venture from Jasper, another request for money, but I said aloud, "I'll be waiting. I'll cook something nice." After the call, I felt a flicker of irritation. Every meeting with Tiffany and Jasper in recent years ended the same way. They got money, I got promises that this time it's different. Tiffany was 34 now, working at an advertising agency on small projects for local companies. She had married Jasper Price 5 years ago. I had never trusted him. There was something in his smile, the way he looked at Tiffany. Not as a partner, but as a stepping stone. Yet Tiffany was captivated. Jasper was an accountant with lofty business ambitions, constantly chasing schemes that inevitably failed. And after each failure, they came to me for money. Always for Tiffany's sake, never for his. Tiffany had loved this house as a child, running through its spacious rooms, playing in the garden, swimming in the lake during summer. Our only child, long awaited and perhaps spoiled. Elizabeth always gave in, and I was too busy to notice. I knew it was foolish to keep funding Jasper's schemes, but I could not refuse. Tiffany was the last connection to the life Elizabeth and I had shared. I rose, stretched, and decided on a walk by the lake. The day was warm, sunlight spilling across familiar paths. I greeted neighbors who, like me, had summer homes here. Mostly retirees or those approaching that stage who had bought land when it was cheap decades ago. At a small promontory overlooking a vacant, overgrown lot, I noticed movement. Machinery rumbled, bulldozers leveling the land. In the center, structures and carriages were being assembled. Finally sold, I thought. This 50-hectare plot had lingered unsold for years. Its distance from main roads made it undesirable to most buyers. On my way back, I ran into Walter Peabody, a former colleague from my construction days. Retired from active work, he now consulted for the city's architecture department. Despite being 72, Walter moved with vigor. Quint. "Haven't seen you in ages," he said, shaking my hand warmly. "Slowly, Walt. Just getting the house ready for summer. What brings you here?" "Just passing through on business," he said, nodding toward the vacant lot. "I'm a consultant for the project going on there." "What? Project?" I asked. "Czech Industries bought it. They're building a plant for industrial chemicals. Huge project. About 300 jobs." I froze. A chemical plant near homes, a lake, and a recreational area? What about regulations? Pollution? Noise? Walter lowered his voice. "Technically, the land has an industrial designation since the 80s. The original factory project never happened, but the category remained. Chem provided safety studies between you and me." He glanced around. "I wouldn't swim in the lake in a few years." The news stunned me. Our quiet paradise, gone. Noise, pollution, trucks, falling property values. Many neighbors. Might sell cheaply and move. "Do the locals know?" I asked. "Not officially yet," he said. "First comes construction, then the announcement. Permits are all signed. Money exchanged." I left him with memories of old times, past co-workers, while my mind churned over the plant. Should I sell the house before the news became public? To whom? And could I part with a home built with my own hands, where I'd spent the best years with Elizabeth? Inside, I packed mechanically, locking doors and windows. Tiffany and Jasper's visit loomed in my thoughts. Strange timing, their sudden desire to come just as construction began. Could they know? But the information wasn't public, Walter had said. I went out on the porch, gazing at the lot one last time. The house seemed as solid as the day Elizabeth and I first crossed its threshold. Yet now its future hung in doubt. Driving back to town, my mind returned to Tiffany's phone call. She had never been interested in the country house after her mother's death. For her, it was too connected to a past she wanted to forget. What had changed? Why homesick now? And the news she mentioned, usually it meant another request for money. But something felt different. I sensed it like the air before a thunderstorm. The subtle shift that tells you something is coming. By the time I reached the city apartment, it was already dark. I turned on the light in the hallway, threw my keys on the nightstand, and made my way into the kitchen. The apartment greeted me with the familiar silence and the slight smell of loneliness. There were no memories here, good or bad, just a place where I slept, ate, and watched TV. I opened the refrigerator, took out the remains of last night's dinner, heated it in the microwave. I ate without appetite, mechanically chewing my food and drinking tea. My thoughts continued to revolve around the chemical plant and my daughter's upcoming visit. Something told me that these two events were connected. But how exactly? Had Tiffany or Jasper somehow gotten wind of the construction plans? But even if they had, why had it suddenly piqued their interest in the country house? Maybe they want to convince me to sell the house before its value drops, but why? They were never interested in my finances except when they needed money, and I'd always planned to leave Tiffany the house as an inheritance. She knew that. I washed the dishes, walked to the living room, and turned on the TV. Some movie, news, talk show. Everything passed my mind, scraps of the conversation with Walter. Tiffany's words on the phone were spinning in my head. We have some news. What news could Tiffany and Jasper possibly have? A new business venture? A pregnancy? A move to another city? I turned off the TV and went into the bedroom. I pulled an old photo album out of the closet, one of the few I'd taken. From the country house, it contained pictures of Tiffany from birth through high school graduation, a little girl with curly hair and freckles on her nose. My daughter, the one person who truly connected me to the world. When Elizabeth died, Tiffany was there for the first few weeks. She helped with the funeral, slept at the country house, cooked meals, then life pulled her back. Work, friends, Jasper. Our meetings became less and less frequent, and our conversations more and more superficial. I didn't blame her. Youth is selfish by nature. But sometimes it hurt me to see how little was left of the loving little girl Elizabeth and I had raised. Jasper didn't make things any better. From the beginning of their relationship, I felt he looked at me not as a father-in-law, but as an ATM. His politeness was calculated. His smile was rehearsed. But Tiffany didn't see it or didn't want to see it. She defended him, excused every failure, believed every promise. I closed the album and put it back in the closet. Anyway, on Saturday, I'd find out what Tiffany and Jasper's news was and what it had to do with the country house. In the meantime, I need to get some sleep and prepare for their visit. As I fell asleep, I thought about the chemical plant, about the bulldozers leveling the land behind the treine, about how life around the lake would change in a year or two. My home, my piece of paradise would be next door to an industrial nightmare. The chimneys, the smoke, the noise of the trucks, and no one even asked our opinion. If Elizabeth were alive, I thought she'd organize a resistance. She would have gathered the neighbors, hired lawyers, made a fuss in the press. Elizabeth had always been a fighter, unlike me. I built, she defended. Together we were a force, and now I was alone, and the strength to fight was gone. With that sad thought, I drifted into a restless sleep in which bulldozers were demolishing my suburban home, and Tiffany and Jasper were laughing, standing back and holding hands. Saturday came faster than I expected. I spent the entire morning in the kitchen preparing treats for Tiffany and Jasper. Roast beef from Elizabeth's recipe, potato salad, apple pie. Cooking always calmed me down, allowed me to organize my thoughts, and there were a lot of thoughts about the chemical plant, about my daughter's strange phone call, about the future of my house. Over the past few days, I had several times wanted to call my neighbors to tell them about the plant, but each time I stopped myself. What could I tell them? I had no documents, only Walter's word. Besides, he said it was too late to make any changes. At exactly 2:00 in the afternoon, Jasper's silver Audi pulled into the driveway. Tiffany always bragged about that car, even though I knew it was bought on a loan they were barely pulling. My daughter jumped out of the car first as Jasper parked. She looked beautiful in a light summer dress with a new haircut, radiant and excited. Daddy. Tiffany hugged me with unusual enthusiasm. I missed her. She smelled of expensive perfume and freshness. I hugged my daughter back, feeling a strange tension in her body. She was like a taut string, too lively, too loud. Hello, darling. You look beautiful. I pulled away, scrutinizing her face. New haircut? Yeah, I thought I'd try something new. Do you like it? Very much. It suits you. I looked at Jasper, who was approaching. Hello, Jasper, Quentin. Good to see you. My brother-in-law shook my hand firmly. He was a tall, well-built man of 38 with prematurely thinning hair that he'd carefully styled to hide the bald spots. It's a lovely day, isn't it? His voice had the same feigned cheerfulness as Tiffany's. It was like they were both acting in a play and not very well. Perfect. I agreed. Come on inside. I made dinner. Oh, Daddy, you didn't have to bother, Tiffany exclaimed, even though she knew I always cooked when they came over. We could order delivery? Delivery to the country house? I grinned. I doubt anyone would agree to drive 20 kilometers from the city. Besides, I like to cook. You know that. We went inside. Tiffany started walking through the rooms as if it were the first time she'd seen them, admiring the view from the window and the furniture that had been there for decades. Oh my God, I'd forgotten what a beautiful house this was. She ran her hand along the wooden railing of the staircase. So spacious, so solid. Jasper, meanwhile, was out on the porch, pretending to admire the lake, but I could see his gaze drifting toward the vacant lot, where the construction was going on. "What is being built there?" he asked me casually as I took the drinks out to the veranda. "I have no idea," I lied. "Some kind of industrial facility from what I'd heard." Jasper nodded, but I saw a strange smile flicker across his face. He knew. They both knew about the plant. Over lunch, the conversation flowed casually about Tiffany's work, about Jasper's new clients, about the weather, about politics, but I sensed that they were avoiding any topic, constantly glancing around as if deciding who would start the conversation. Finally, when I served dessert apple pie with vanilla ice cream, Tiffany cleared her throat. "Daddy, we want to talk to you about something important," she began, putting her hand on Jasper's shoulder as if looking for support. "I'm all ears." I set my fork aside, preparing myself for another request for money. "Jasper and I," she hesitated, then blurted out, "We want to have a baby." It took me by surprise. In 5 years of marriage, they'd never once talked about children. Tiffany had always maintained that she wanted to build a career first. "That's wonderful," I said cautiously. "I'm happy for you." And we thought. Jasper entered that we'd need a bigger house. The apartment in the city is too small for a child. Now I began to realize where the wind was blowing. They want money for a new house. But then why this interest in a country estate? Why this show of admiration for the house, and you want me to help with the purchase of the house? I asked bluntly. No, Tiffany hastily objected. "We're not asking for money, Dad." In fact, she looked at Jasper again. "We thought this house would be perfect for our family." I froze with a cup of coffee in my hand. This house? My house? "You hardly live here anyway," Tiffany said softly. "Since Mom died, you've only been here on Wednesdays. We could move here, raise our kids outdoors by the lake." I looked at my daughter, not recognizing her. It wasn't a request, but a statement of fact. She'd already decided she was going to take my house. "Tiffany," I said slowly, trying to be calm, "I built this house with my own hands. For your mom and me. Every nail, every board was chosen and installed by me. I'm not going to sell it." "But Daddy," she said, a familiar whimsical note in her voice, "you said yourself that it's hard for you to be here because of the memories of your mom. This is a chance for us to start a new life, to give your grandson or granddaughter a happy childhood. Besides," Jasper added, "we're not asking you to give the house away for free. We're willing to buy it back at market value." I almost laughed. The market value of a house next to a soon-to-be chemical plant would drop dramatically. They knew that. That's why they were in a hurry. They wanted to get there before the construction was officially announced. "And where will you get the money?" I asked, although I already knew the answer. "We have savings," Jasper said evasively, "and we can take out a mortgage." False. They didn't have savings. I knew their financial situation well. Every time another of Jasper's promising projects failed, they came to me for help. "You know what?" I set my cup aside. "Let's get back to this conversation later. I've got to think about it." "Sure, Dad." Tiffany smiled strainedly. We realized this is a big decision. After dessert, we moved to the living room. The conversation became general again, but the tension didn't go away. I could feel the eyes of my daughter and son-in-law on me, as if they were gauging how much I had given in to their entreaties. Around 5 Jasper suddenly remembered that he had left some papers in the car. When he returned, he put the file on the coffee table. "By the way, Quentin," he said casually, "I have a small favor to ask of you. Just a formality. What is it?" I was wary. "You see, I've recently taken out a new insurance policy on our apartment and car." He opened the folder and pulled out several sheets of small print. "And the insurer asked you as the owner of this house to sign some documents too. It's standard procedure due to the fact that we come here often." I picked up the papers, started reading the first page. The text was written in complicated, legal language with many references to paragraphs and clauses of some laws. I immediately got a headache from this clerical stuff. "What exactly am I signing?" I asked, flipping through the pages. "Just confirming that Tiffany and I live here on a regular basis," Jasper explained. "It's for the extended insurance coverage. Just a formality, really." I glanced at my daughter. She was smiling, but there was tension in her eyes. Something was wrong here. It should have refused, insisted on taking the papers home and scrutinizing them, but Tiffany was already holding out a pen to me. "Dad, it's really just a formality. It's nothing special." She put her hand on my shoulder. Jasper had been fiddling with this insurance for a week to get the best deal for us. I hesitated. My inner voice was screaming that I shouldn't sign something I didn't understand. But this was my daughter, my Tiffany. Could she really have fooled me? Right here and here, Jasper pointed. To the signature lines on the last page. I signed slowly, still questioning my judgment. Great. Jasper quickly gathered up the papers and put them away in a folder. "Thank you, Quentin. The insurer will be pleased." After that, they stayed at my place for about another hour, but we didn't have any more conversation. I felt cheated, though I couldn't quite put my finger on it. When they finally left for home, I was relieved. "It was so great, Daddy." Tiffany hugged me goodbye. "Thanks for the delicious lunch. And think about our proposal." "Okay, I will," I replied, dryly. As I watched their Audi drive off down the road, I felt a strong urge to reread the papers I'd signed. Something in Jasper's demeanor, his hurry, his insistence made me uneasy. I decided to return to Thessaly at once, not to stay in the house until morning as I had originally planned. All along the way, I was plagued by doubts. Why would the insurance company need my signature? Why hadn't Jasper left me a copy of the paperwork? And why was Tiffany so tense? At the city apartment, the first thing I did was call Michael Baird, an old friend of mine who worked as a lawyer. The answering machine answered. Michael was probably out of town for the weekend. I left a message asking him to call me back as soon as possible. Then I tried to remember exactly what those papers had said. There was definitely mention of my country house, its address. There was something about property rights, about registration, but the specific wording slipped from my memory. I spent the next 2 days in anxious anticipation. Michael never called back. As it turned out later, he was at a conference in another state, and on Monday morning, the doorbell rang. A courier handed me a stamped envelope. Inside was a notice from the registry office that the property had changed ownership. My country house no longer belonged to me. The new owner was Tiffany Price. I sunk into the chair, unable to believe my eyes. It was impossible. How? When? And then it hit me. Insurance papers. It wasn't insurance. It was a deed of gift. I had signed a deed to my house. With trembling hands, I dialed my daughter's number. After a few beeps, she answered too quickly, as if she'd been expecting a call. "Daddy?" I could hear the anxiety in her voice. "Tiffany, what have you done?" My voice sounded muffled, like it wasn't mine. "I got the papers from the registry office." Silence. Then a deep sigh. "Dad, I can explain." "Explain what?" I was starting to boil. "That you tricked me into signing a deed to the house I built with my own hands. The house your mother and I lived in. All our lives. You don't live there anyway." There's a defensive tone in her voice. "Since Mom died, you've been there once a week at most, and Jasper and I need a place to raise our baby." "What baby, Tiffany?" I was practically screaming. "You're not pregnant." It was a lie like everything else. "We plan on having a baby," she replied stubbornly. "Sooner or later." "Why couldn't you just ask? Why did you have to lie to me?" "Because you wouldn't have said yes." She sounded annoyed now. "You're clinging to this house even though it's only bringing you pain. You said yourself you couldn't be there because of the memories of your mom." I closed my eyes, trying to deal with the anger and pain. My own daughter, flesh from flesh. How could she? "Give me the house back, Tiffany," I said quietly. "Just sign the reverse deed of gift and we'll forget about it." "I can't, Dad." Her voice became hard. "Jasper and I had already taken out a loan against the house. The money spent on what?" I was stunned. "What could you have spent the money on so quickly? It's none of your business." She cut me off. "Look, I understand that you're upset, but in a couple of months, you'll realize it's better for everyone. This house is just a nuisance to you, and we're going to make it a real family home. Plus, the neighborhood's about to become very upscale. That's it. They thought it would be a luxury apartment complex, not a chemical plant. That's why they were in such a hurry. They wanted to get there before the construction started, when prices would skyrocket. But the reality was different. The house was about to depreciate ridiculously." "Tiffany," it tried to say calmly, "you don't know the whole truth. They're not building an apartment complex next to the house. They're building a chemical plant. Chem Industries bought the land to make industrial chemicals." Silence, then nervous laughter. "Dad, stop making things up. We checked it out. Lakeview Development is building a luxury development with a golf course and a marina." "Who told you that?" "Jasper has a contact in City Hall. He showed us the plans for the development. It's official. Now I get it. They've been duped like they duped me. Someone in the administration, maybe Jasper's acquaintance, had sold them false information to avoid the protests against the plant." "Tiffany?" I sighed. "Met Walter Peabody, a former colleague of mine who now works for the Office of Architecture. He's consulting on the Chem project. It's a chemical plant, not an apartment complex." "You're lying," she screamed. "You just want the house back." "Jasper has seen the documents. Call the architecture department and ask them yourself," I said tiredly. "Or go there and ask to see the official design." "I don't believe you," she said, tears in her voice. "You've always been against Jasper, against our plans. You want us to fail, Tiffany?" My voice trembled. "You're my daughter. You're the only thing I have left. How could you do this to me?" "I'm sorry, Daddy," she sobbed. "But the house is mine now. And no matter what you say, I don't believe in your chemical plant. We're moving in next week." With those words, she hung up the phone. I sat there stunned by what had happened. The house I had built with my own hands. The house where Elizabeth and I were happy. The house where Tiffany had grown up. Now it belonged to my daughter who had swindled it from me. And worst of all, she and her husband were the victims of a scam, believing in a non-existent luxury complex. They took out a loan against a house that was about to go into foreclosure because of its proximity to a chemical plant. It was an irony of fate, cruel and merciless. It lost the house, and they lost the money which they had probably already invested in yet another of Jasper's up-and-coming projects. At that moment, I didn't know what I felt stronger. Anger at my daughter for betraying me, or pity for her for the trap she had put herself in. I spent 3 days in a kind of daze. I didn't leave the apartment, didn't answer the phone, almost didn't. eat. My thoughts revolved around my lost home and my daughter's betrayal. I reviewed our life, trying to figure out where I had gone wrong in raising her. Maybe Elizabeth and I had spoiled her too much. Or was I not an attentive enough father, too? Immersed in my work? What turned a sweet, loving little girl into a woman capable of deceiving her own father? On the fourth day, a call came in that I decided to take after all. It was Michael Baird, my lawyer friend, who had finally returned from a conference. "Quint, I'm sorry I didn't call you back sooner. What happened?" I told him the whole story. Tiffany, and Jasper's visit, the signed documents, the chemical plant. "The devil," Michael swore after hearing me out. "I can try to contest the deed of gift. We can prove that you were mizzled about the contents of the documents." "What are the odds?" Michael paused. "Honestly, 50-50. The problem is, it's your daughter. Courts are reluctant to get involved in family matters, especially when it comes to transferring property from parents to children. They might think you just changed your mind." I sighed. Even if we won the case, it would mean a public scandal, a permanent break with Tiffany. "I'll think about it, Mike. Thanks for the counseling." "One more thing," he added before hanging up about the chemical plant. "Are you sure this information is accurate? If it is, the value of your house will drop dramatically. Maybe on the bright side, you got rid of a troubled asset." After talking to Michael, I felt a little better. For the first time in days, I showered, shaved, and ordered food from a nearby restaurant. Life went on, even without the country house. That same evening, Tiffany called. I hesitated before answering, but pressed the answer button. "Daddy, it's me," she said, her voice sounding uncertain with a hint of guilt. "I can see that," I answered dryly. "I'm calling." She hesitated. "I wanted to apologize for our last conversation. I shouldn't have yelled at you." I remained silent, waiting for her to continue. "Jasper and I discussed the situation," she continued after a pause. "We realized that what we did was wrong. But Dad, you have to understand. We really believe it's what's best for everyone. You're hardly ever in the house, and we're going to create a real family there." "Did you call to explain again why it's okay to cheat on your father?" I asked, feeling the anger boiling up inside me again. "No, Dad," she answered quickly. "I'm calling to tell you that the house is now officially mine. All the papers are in order. I knew that already, but hearing it from my daughter was especially painful. I'm sorry, but the house doesn't belong to you now," she said, with a note of triumph in her voice that she was probably trying to hide. And then the strangest thing happened. Instead of another outburst of anger, I felt a kind of release. Suddenly, the whole situation seemed absurdly comical. My daughter and her husband, who had swindled their way into the house, sincerely believed they had made a good deal. What they didn't know was that instead of profits, they were in for a huge loss and disappointment. I laughed, softly at first, then louder and louder, unable to stop. "Dad," Tiffany sounded confused. "Are you laughing?" "Yes, honey," I said through my laughter. "I am lawing, but why?" She was clearly confused by my reaction. "Because sometimes life has wonderful surprises," I replied, calming down. "Don't worry about me, Tiffany. I'll be fine. When are you planning on moving?" "Next Tuesday," she answered, confused. "Jasper has already hired movers. We were wondering if you wanted to take anything out of the house. Any personal belongings?" I wondered. "Was there anything there that I wanted to keep?" "The photo albums I'd moved to the city apartment a long time ago. Tools, furniture, all of those things seemed unimportant now." "No, nothing," I finally answered. "Everything I cared about, I'd already taken. The rest, consider it part of the house." "Thank you, Daddy." I could hear the relief in her voice. "I'm glad you're not mad. Jasper and I want you to come visit us often. It is, after all, your home, too." "Not anymore," I thought, but I said out loud, "Of course, Tiffany, I'll be sure to visit." We said goodbye, and I put the phone away. still smiling. A strange relief never left me. Now that the house had officially passed to Tiffany, I felt the weight of the past getting lighter. Perhaps it really was for the best to sever the last material connection to a past life. But there was another reason for my sudden exhilaration. I pictured Tiffany and Jasper's faces when they learned the truth about the chemical plant. When they would realize that their profitable investment had turned out to be a disaster. Part of me knew I should warn them, tell them the whole truth. But the other part, the part that had been wounded by the betrayal, wanted them to find out for themselves through their own bitter experience. In the end, I decided not to interfere. They had made their choice. Now, let them live with the consequences. Was it cruel? Perhaps. But no more cruel than cheating your own father out of his house. Over the next few days, I set about remodeling my city apartment. I used to think of it as a temporary shelter, a place where I slept between visits to my real home. Now it was my only home and needed to be made more comfortable. I bought a new couch, replaced the old TV, hung some paintings on the walls that used to be stored in the closet. In the bedroom, I put a new bed in a closet. On the balcony, he organized a small green corner with indoor plants and a folding table for morning coffee. Work distracted me from my gloomy thoughts. Every nail hammered into the wall for a new shelf. Every piece of furniture assembled was a small victory over the apathy that threatened to consume me after losing my home. On Sunday, 2 days before Tiffany and Jasper's planned move, I decided to take one last drive to the country house, not to go inside just to see it from a distance to say goodbye. I parked the car in a small lot by the lake about half a kilometer from the house. From here, I had a nice view of the entire shore, including my now former lot. To my surprise, it was already lively outside the house. Jasper's silver Audi was in the driveway, and another car I didn't recognize was nearby. I noticed a few people on the porch: Tiffany, Jasper, and someone else. Had they decided to move in early, or had they just come to prepare the house for the move? Either way, I wasn't going to approach them. I just sat in the car, watching from afar as my daughter and son-in-law fussed around the house that no longer belonged to me. Through the open car window, I could hear bits and pieces of their conversation as they went outside. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was excited, joyful. They were discussing something, waving their arms, pointing at the house and the neighborhood. At one point, a man unknown to me, judging by the suit, some representative of an official organization, unfolded a large sheet of paper in front of them. Probably a plan or a map. All three of them leaned over it, and even from a distance I could see Tiffany and Jasper's faces brighten. They still believed in the luxury apartment complex, that the value of the house would skyrocket when construction began. Poor, naive kids. I could get out of the car, walk up to them and tell them the truth. I could have pointed to the construction equipment behind the forest belt, explained that this is not the preparation for the construction of luxury villas, but the beginning of work on a chemical plant. I could have warned them, saved them from disappointment and financial loss, but I didn't. Something held me back. A mixture of resentment, bitterness, and a strange gloating. Let them find out for themselves. Let them feel what it was like to have their plans and hopes dashed. I started the engine and drove away, not waiting for them to notice me. On the way back to town, I thought about what had happened and what lay ahead. Perhaps I had done wrong in not warning my daughter about the plant. But had she done the right thing by cheating me out of my house? Was Jasper acting honestly by slipping me documents under the guise of insurance? In a way, justice had served itself without my intervention. They wanted to cheat me out of valuable real estate and ended up with a house that would soon become virtually uninhabitable and lose most of its value. Back in the city apartment, I felt a strange calmness. There was no longer any point in clinging to the past, mourning the lost house, or grieving over my daughter's betrayal. Life went on, and I still had a future, albeit not the one I'd planned, but still my own. I opened the bottle of good whiskey I was saving for a special occasion, poured some into a glass, and stepped out onto the balcony. The sun was setting, coloring the city's rooftops with golden and pink tones. Below, people were going about their business. Cars were passing by. Life was boiling. This was my city, my new world. No country house, no illusions of a family idol. Perhaps it was for the best. At 67, I had a chance to start over, to free myself from the weight of the past. I raised my glass as if in a toast. To new life, I said aloud, and to justice, which sometimes comes in the most unexpected ways. Over the next few days, I watched Tiffany and Jasper's move from a distance. Didn't drive up to the house, but kept an eye on what was happening through. Walter Peabody, who occasionally called me to tell me the news. "Yours moved in last Tuesday," Hein informed me on one such call. "They brought in a bunch of furniture and some designers are running around. Looks like they're doing a major renovation." "What's going on with the construction?" I asked. "It's going according to plan. They've already laid the foundation for the main building. In a couple of months, they will start installing equipment. And in 6 months, the plant should be operating at full capacity. And none of the locals know yet." "There's still no official announcement," Walter replied, "but the rumors are flying. Some of the neighbors are starting to wonder what's being built. I think the truth will come out soon." I thanked him for the information and hung up. Part of me was still fighting the urge to warn Tiffany to save her from the disappointment to come. But the other part, the part that had been wounded by the betrayal, wanted them to learn the truth in the most painful way possible. Tiffany hadn't called me since the move. Perhaps she was too busy setting up her new home. Or more likely, she felt guilty about what she'd done to me and didn't know what to say. I immersed myself in setting up my city apartment and establishing a new life. I signed up for the local senior citizens club, where I played chess twice a week with other old people like me. I found a small carpentry shop nearby where I could rent a workbench and tools for a few hours. I started making small wooden figurines, a hobby I had enjoyed in my youth, but had abandoned because of work and family concerns. Gradually, the pain of Tiffany's betrayal dulled, giving way to a detached curiosity. How long would they live in ignorance regarding the plant? How would they react when they learned the truth? What would they do with a house that would soon become virtually uninhabitable? Sometimes at night, lying awake in my new bed, I imagined their faces when they would first hear the noise of construction equipment behind the forest belt. When they would see the first pipes of the chemical plant rising above the trees, when they would realize that their profitable investment had turned out to be a nightmare. They weren't the most noble thoughts, I realized that, but they were strangely satisfying, as if compensating for the humiliation I felt when I learned of the deception. About 2 weeks after Tiffany moved in, I happened to run into Brandon Lewis, one of my lake neighbors, whose house was not far from my former lot. We ran into each other at the supermarket downtown. "Quint!" he exclaimed when he saw me at the canned food shelf. "Long time no see. How's it going?" "Not bad, Brandon," I said, shaking his hand. "How are you? How's the lake?" "Same old stuff," Hez smiled. But then his face turned serious. "I heard you sold your house to your daughter and they've already moved in." "Not exactly sold," I said evasively. "More like handed it over. Family stuff, you know." Sure, Brandon nodded. "Do they know about the plant?" So, the rumors had already started. I pretended I didn't know what he was talking about. "What? Plant? You don't know?" Brandon was surprised. "They're building a chemical plant behind the forest belt. Chem Industries manufacturing industrial chemicals. It's all the talk of the neighborhood these days. First, I've heard of it." I lied. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely." Brandon lowered his voice. "My brother-in-law works for the construction company that won the contract to build the buildings. He said it's going to be a huge 247 manufacturing facility. Noise, trucks, emissions, the neighborhood will turn into an industrial zone. That's terrible. I shook my head. Isn't there anything we can do? We're trying. Brandon sighed. We're collecting signatures, hiring lawyers, but it's a long shot because Chem has all the official permits and the land is industrial. Some people have already put their houses up for sale before the news becomes public, but there are few buyers. Rumors spread quickly. Do my daughter and her husband know? I asked with feigned concern. I'm not sure, Brandon shrugged. They just moved in and they hadn't talked to anyone much yet, but I think they'll find out soon because they're talking about it on every corner. We talked a little more about the weather, fishing, old times. Then we said goodbye, promising to meet for a beer sometime. On the way home, I pondered the fact that Tiffany and Jasper would soon learn the truth. Perhaps they had already heard the rumors but refused to believe it. After all, they had the official plans for the luxury apartment complex in their hands, shown to an acquaintance of Jasper's from the administration. I almost felt sorry for them, almost, but not quite. After all, they'd chosen this path when they decided to deceive me. Now, they were going to reap the rewards of their deception. That evening, I stepped out onto the balcony of my city apartment, looking out at the lights of the city. I had a glass of whiskey in my hand, a ritual that had become my way of ending the day. I thought about the country house, about the chemical plant, about Tiffany and Jasper, about how strange and unpredictable life is, how our actions have consequences. We can't foresee. Perhaps in losing my home, I gained something more valuable, freedom from the past, a chance to start over. And Tiffany and Jasper, in gaining a house, will soon realize that they have gained far more problems than benefits. Life can be surprisingly fair sometimes, even without our interference. The thought made me smile. I raised my glass as if in a toast and drank to the irony of fate, which sometimes proves wiser than all our plans and calculations. It had been 3 weeks since Tiffany and Jasper had moved into the country house. During that time, I had not spoken to my daughter once. She had not called, and I had not imposed. I got information about their lives from neighbors, mostly Walter Peabody, who occasionally called me to tell me the latest news from the lake. According to him, the young couple had developed a flurry of activity in fixing up the house and grounds. They hired a landscaper for the garden, started renovations on the first floor, and bought new furniture. It seems that they really believed that they had made a profitable purchase and were preparing for a happy life in a prestigious neighborhood. Meanwhile, behind the forest belt, the work was going on. The foundation of the main building of the chemical plant had already been laid and the walls were being erected. The noise of construction equipment was getting louder, but the dense strip of trees hid the scale of what was happening from their side of the lake. I lived my new life, gradually getting used to the idea that the country house was no longer mine. I furnished the city apartment, met with friends, did carpentry in a rented workshop. Sometimes in the evenings, I thought about Tiffany and Jasper. Imagined their faces when they learned the truth about the plant. A part of me still felt bitterness over their betrayal, but that bitterness grew weaker every day. One morning, almost a month after they had moved in, the phone rang. Tiffany's name popped up on the phone screen. I hesitated for a few seconds before answering. Hello? Dad? My daughter's voice sounded strange, tense, and unsure at the same time. Can you talk? Yes, of course. What's wrong, you? She stammered. Do you know what kind of construction's going on behind the tree line? All the neighbors are saying some weird stuff, and Jasper can't get through to his contact in administration. This is it. The moment of truth has arrived. I could have pretended I didn't know, but I decided not to lie. It's a chemical plant, Tiffany. Czech Industries is building an industrial chemical plant. I told you about it when you called to tell me you took the house. Silence, then a sharp intake of breath. You did, but I thought you were just trying to scare us. Jasper had the paperwork to build the apartment complex. Apparently, someone in the administration deliberately misled you, I replied calmly. Perhaps the same person who helped you get information about my house and its potential value. There was silence again. I could almost see Tiffany struggling with the realization that she and Jasper had been deceived the way they deceived me. "But that's impossible," she finally said. "Jasper has seen the plans, the maps. It's supposed to be a luxury apartment complex with a golf course and a marina. Talk to Walter Peabody. I suggested he's consulting on the Chem project, or go to the city's Department of Architecture and ask to see the official plans for the development." I don't believe it. I heard tears in her voice. "There's no way we're being duped like this. Tiffany," I zagged, "you better accept the truth as soon as possible. The chemical plant will be up and running in a few months. Property values in the area are already dropping, and many neighbors have put their houses up for sale." "Jesus," she whispered. "What are we going to do?" Part of me wanted to say, "I don't know, that's your problem," but I couldn't be that cruel. Despite her betrayal, she was still my daughter. "Maybe you should think about selling too," I suggested. "Before the news of the plant becomes public, though I'm afraid it's too late. Rumors travel fast." "But we just moved in," she exclaimed. "Spent a lot of money on repairs and new furniture. And the loan," her voice trembled. "We took out a loan against the house thinking it would go up in value." "I'm sorry, Tiffany," I said, and it was partly true. "But I warned you about the plan. You should have insisted." There was an accusatory note in her voice. "Make me believe. After you tricked me into taking my house now, I couldn't hold back my emotions. Do you really think you have the right to demand that I help you?" Tiffany sobbed, "I need to talk to Jasper. I'll call you back." She hung up, leaving me with a heavy feeling. Despite all the hurt, she was still my daughter, and seeing her suffer was painful. But at the same time, I realized it was a lesson she had to learn. I didn't hear from Tiffany for a few days. I didn't call. I decided to give her time to digest the information and discuss the situation with her husband. But I learned from Walter that the rumors about the chemical plant were now being discussed openly, and the lake residents had begun organizing protests. Too late, of course, but at least they were trying to do something. And then, about a week after our conversation with Tiffany, my apartment doorbell rang. I opened it and saw my daughter, pale, eyes red from crying, but with a determined expression on her face. "May I come in?" she asked without saying hello. I stepped back silently, letting her into the apartment. Tiffany walked into the living room and stopped in the middle of the room looking around. "You redecorated," she remarked. "Yes," I confirmed. "I decided it was time to fix up the place where I now lived permanently." She wrinkled her nose at the hidden reproach in my words. "Daddy," she began without preamble, "it's true. They're really building a chemical plant there. Jasper went to the architecture department, saw the official plans. Chem industries, manufacturing industrial chemicals and plastics. It's scheduled to open next February." I nodded. I had nothing to'd. I knew it from the start. "You knew." It wasn't a question, but a statement. "You knew about the plan before we took the house, and you didn't tell us." "I tried to tell you," I reminded him. "You didn't believe me. You should have insisted." Tiffany raised her voice. "You should have made us check. You could see we were making a mistake after you tricked me into signing the deed of gift." I remained calm, even though everything was boiling inside. "Really, Tiffany? You tricked me and then accused me of not stopping you from tricking yourself?" She lowered her eyes. Her shoulders slumped. "We just wanted to," she started, but I interrupted. "I know what you wanted. You wanted my house so you could capitalize on the price appreciation after the luxury complex was built. You weren't going to live there. You were planning to sell it for a profit. That's why you were in such a hurry. That's why you tricked me with those supposed insurance papers." Tiffany looked up at me, her eyes full of tears. "Yes," she admitted quietly. "It was like that at first. We heard about the plans for the complex, and we thought it was our chance. Jasper was sure that real estate prices in the neighborhood would skyrocket as soon as construction started. But then when we moved in," she hesitated. I really liked living there in the house where I grew up. I started imagining us raising our kids there, you coming over, how things could be. I looked at my daughter, not knowing whether to believe her or not. Tiffany had always had a knack for manipulating people, especially me. Maybe she was saying what I wanted to hear now, too. "And now what?" I asked. "We're trapped." She sank to the couch as if her legs wouldn't hold her. "The house has already lost a third of its value just because of the rumors about the plant. And when it's finished and operational, the price will drop even more. We won't be able to sell it for half of the loan we took out." "Why did you need a loan in the first place?" I asked. "You got the house for free?" Tiffany looked away. "Jasper, he had a new business project. He was sure it would work, especially with the extra financing." "And did it work?" I already knew the answer, but I wanted to hear it from her. "No." She shook her head. "All the money was spent, and the project failed." "It always does." I sighed. History was repeating itself for the nth time. Jasper and his brilliant ideas, Tiffany blindly trusting her husband, money wasted. Only before they were losing my money. Now they were losing their own. Or rather, the money the bank had borrowed against my former house. "I'm sorry," I said, and it was true. Despite the hurt, I didn't want to see my daughter in such despair. "You could have prevented this," she began again. "If you'd insisted, if you'd made us check out the information about the plant." "Tiffany," I sat down across from her, "you have to understand one thing. All of this is the result of your own actions. You decided to deceive me. You made me sign documents without explaining what they were. You took away the house I built with my own hands. And now you accuse me of not protecting you from the consequences of your own deception. But you are my father," she exclaimed with tears in her voice. "You should have. What should I have done?" I interrupted. "Should I have let you deceive me with impunity? Was I supposed to help you even after betraying you? Tiffany, you're an adult. You made a choice. Now live with the consequences." She covered her face with her hands and burst into tears. I sat across from her, not knowing what to do. Part of me wanted to hug her, to comfort her, to tell her everything would be okay. But the other part, the part that had been hurt by her betrayal, kept me in place. "What do we do now?" she asked when she'd calmed down a little. "We can't sell the house, can't pay off the loan. Jasper is desperate, talking bankruptcy. What about your job?" I asked. "Are you still at the ad agency?" "Yes, but my salary won't even cover the interest on the loan, let alone the debt itself." She wiped away her tears. "Daddy, I know I don't have the right to ask, but maybe you could help, at least some advice," I wondered. Could I help? And more. Importantly, did I want to after everything she'd done, Tiffany? I finally said, "I'll think about what I can do, but I'm not promising anything. And before I even begin to think about helping, there's something you need to understand and admit." "What?" She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "What you and Jasper did to me was wrong. Not just wrong, but deliberate deception. You took advantage of my trust to take away the house I built with my own hands. A home where your mother and I were happy. And until you admit it, apologize sincerely, not for the consequences, but for the act itself. I see no point in helping you." Tiffany was silent for a long time, staring at the floor. Finally, she raised her head and looked me in the eye. "You're right," she said quietly. "What we did was terrible. I let Jasper convince me that it was okay to cheat on you for our future. He said you were going to inherit the house from me anyway. So what did it matter when it was mine? But it was a lie, and I knew it. I betrayed you, Dad. And I'm so sorry." I could see the sincerity in her eyes, in the trembling lips, in the slumped shoulders. It was real remorse, not for the consequences, but for the realization that it was wrong. "I believe you," I said after a pause. "And I appreciate your honesty, but I need time to think about the situation. Let's meet in a few days, and I'll tell you what can be done." Tiffany nodded, wiping away her tears. "Thank you, Daddy. Even if you decide not to help, thanks for listening." She stood up, getting ready to leave. At the door, she turned around. "You know," she said with a sad smile, "when you laughed on the phone that day, I didn't understand why. Now I do. It was ironic that we tricked you and got caught in a trap." "Life teaches strange lessons sometimes," I replied. "I hope you and Jasper learned this one." After Tiffany left, I sat in silence for a long time, thinking about our conversation. Her remorse seemed genuine, but was it enough to forgive the betrayal? And more importantly, should I help them out of the situation they'd put themselves in? On the one hand, they got what they deserved. Their deception boomeranged back on them in the form of a chemical plant and a foreclosed house. Justice was served, without my intervention. On the other hand, Tiffany was my daughter, the only close person I had left. Could I let her drown in debt and despair, even if she was responsible for her own problems? I stepped out onto the balcony, looking at the city below. It was getting evening. The lights were starting to come on in the windows of the houses. Somewhere out there, 20 kilometers away, was the house I had built with my own hands. The house that now belonged to Tiffany and Jasper. The house that would soon be next door to a chemical plant. What would Elizabeth say? What would she do in my place? Would she forgive her daughter? Would she help her out of the financial hole she dug for herself? I didn't know the answers to those questions. But one thing I did know was that Tiffany had learned a lesson she would remember for the rest of her life. Maybe that was more important than the house or the money. I went back to the apartment, poured myself a whiskey, and sat down in a chair. Tomorrow, I would call Michael Baird and consult on the legal aspects of the situation. Maybe there's a way to help Tiffany without losing my dignity. But today, I just wanted to take a break from the emotional turmoil and think about the future, mine and my daughter's. After all, despite all the hurt and betrayals, she was still my flesh and blood. And somewhere deep inside, I still loved her, though that love was now mixed with the bitterness of disappointment and mistrust. I looked at my reflection in the window pane, an old man with gray hair and a wrinkled face. Life had passed, leaving behind a house I could no longer call my own, and a daughter who had betrayed me for money. But maybe it wasn't too late to make things right. Not the house. It's gone. But my relationship with Tiffany might still be salvageable, if not for her, then for the memory of Elizabeth, who loved our daughter unconditionally, despite her flaws. With that thought, I finished my whiskey and went to bed, feeling for the first time in a long time, not only bitterness, but also a glimmer of hope for a future in which my daughter and I could find common ground, even after such an ordeal. Months have passed since the day Tiffany came to me in repentance. A lot has changed in that time, both in my life and in the lives of my daughter and her husband. After our conversation, I actually called Michael Baird and consulted about the legal aspects of the situation. It turned out that Tiffany and Jasper had virtually no chance of contesting the loan agreement or avoiding paying the debt. The house was officially theirs, and they had knowingly put up a large sum of money as collateral. I didn't offer them the money, not because I couldn't help, but because I realized it wouldn't solve the problem, but would only delay the inevitable. Jasper would come up with some promising project again, lose everything again, and again, they would come to me for help. This vicious cycle needed to be broken. Instead, I offered them another option to sell the house at a reduced price as soon as possible before the construction of the plant went too far and prices fell permanently. They would have to pay the difference between the sale amount and the loan amount on their own, but it would still be better than being left with a devalued house and full debt. Tiffany agreed to my proposal, but Jasper was adamantly opposed. He still believed he could find a way out that would allow them to keep the house and not lose money. Maybe the plant wouldn't be such a bad neighbor, he said. Maybe the residents' protests would have an effect and construction would stop. Maybe there would be a buyer who wouldn't be afraid of being next door to a chemical plant. Their arguments on the subject grew more and more heated. Tiffany called me almost every week with new conflicts with her husband. Jasper accused her of panicking and selling the house for nothing. She accused him of being stubborn and unwilling to admit he was wrong. Meanwhile, construction of the plant continued, and property values in the lakefront neighborhood were dropping by the day. Many neighbors had already sold their homes and moved away. Those who couldn't sell or didn't want to lose money stayed, but the atmosphere in the once idyllic neighborhood became increasingly oppressive. Protests against the plant were fruitless. Czech Industries had all the necessary permits and the support of local officials interested in new jobs and tax revenue. Unlike Tiffany and Jasper, my life changed for the better. During those 6 months, I finally organized the city apartment, turning it into a cozy nest where everything had its place and purpose. I regularly visited the club for pensioners where I found new friends, old people like me with similar life experience and interests. I became particularly close to Ruth Harrison, a widow in her 70s, and a former literature teacher. We often walked together in the park discussing books, sharing memories. Sometimes we went to the movies or the theater. It wasn't a romantic relationship. The memory of Elizabeth was too fresh, but a warm friendship that brightened my days. And then something unexpected happened. One morning, I got a call from Gregory Lansing, the CEO of the construction company where I had worked most of my life. We hadn't spoken since I retired 7 years ago. "Quentin," he said after exchanging greetings, "I have a business proposition for you. We're starting a mentoring program for young engineers. We want experienced retired specialists to advise newcomers, share their experience, and help them avoid common mistakes. You are remembered as one of the best civil engineers in the company. Would you be interested in joining the program? The job is not full-time, the schedule is flexible, and the pay is hourly." The offer took me by surprise. I hadn't thought about returning to professional work in a long time, even in such a limited form. But the idea of sharing knowledge with the younger generation of feeling needed and useful again, it was tempting. "I'll think about it, Greg," I replied. "When do you need?" An answer? By the end of the week would be ideal. The program starts in 2 weeks. After the call, I thought for a long time. On the one hand, I liked my current life. Quiet, measured, without stress and obligations. On the other hand, I sometimes missed my work, the feeling that I was doing something meaningful, that my experience and knowledge were needed by someone. In the end, I agreed, and I didn't regret it. The program turned out to be exactly what I needed, not too burdensome, but giving a sense of involvement and usefulness. I consulted with the young engineers twice a week, checking their projects, giving advice, and talking about difficult cases from my own practice. Seeing their eyes light up when they understood a complex concept or found an elegant solution to a problem was a real pleasure. This work brought new meaning and structure to my life. I no longer felt like a useless old man living out my century. I was Quentin Hollister again, a respected civil engineer whose opinion is valued and whose advice is heed. But what about Tiffany and Jasper? Their situation was becoming increasingly dire. The construction of the plant was in full swing. The main buildings had already been erected and equipment was being installed. Huge pipes of future ventilation systems and chimneys towered over the wooded area, visible even from my former home. Property values in the neighborhood had plummeted to record lows. Some homes sold for a third of their original price, and many found no buyers at all. Tiffany and Jasper also put their house on the market. But in 6 months, they received only one offer so low that even Tiffany, who was willing to accept any terms, couldn't accept it. Their marriage was falling apart. Constant fights over money, mutual accusations, growing irritation with each other. All of this was undermining a relationship that hadn't been particularly strong before. Tiffany mentioned the possibility of divorce more and more in our phone conversations. "He blames me for everything, Dad," she complained. He says, "I insisted on buying the house when it was the exact opposite." He even accuses me of not checking the information about the factory on purpose, even though he showed me those fake plans for the apartment complex. I tried not to interfere in their relationship, limiting myself to general advice and support. I felt sorry for Tiffany, but I realized that she had to figure out her own life and make a choice to stay with Jasper or start over without him. Our relationship with my daughter was slowly improving, although there wasn't and probably never would be complete trust. She came into town once every 2 weeks, and we had lunch together and talked. Sometimes I gave her small amounts of money, not to pay off the loan, but for personal expenses, since her own salary was now almost entirely spent on payments to the bank. Jasper didn't come to these meetings partly because I didn't invite him, partly because he was avoiding me, apparently feeling guilty about what had happened. And then the day came when the situation reached a critical point. Tiffany called me early in the morning, crying so hard I could barely make out her words. "Jasper's gone," she finally said. Packed up and left. Said he couldn't live like that. Any more in debt in the house next to that damn factory with me. He left a note saying he was filing for divorce and going to California to live with his brother. I wasn't surprised that was the way it was going, but it was clearly a blow to Tiffany. "I'm so sorry, honey," I said. "Do you want me to come over?" "No, you don't have to." She calmed down a little. "I'll be fine. It's just, what am I going to do? I can't pay the loan alone. I can't even afford the interest, and nobody wants to buy a house. Come to my place," I suggested without much thought. "There's a second bedroom in my apartment. You can stay with me until you get things sorted out." "Really?" I could hear the hope in her voice. "Do you mind?" "Of course not. You're my daughter, Tiffany, no matter what." 2 days later, she moved in with a small suitcase of belongings and a heavy load of problems. The house was vacant, and I had a loan to pay off. Life together was not easy. It had been a long time since we had lived under the same roof, and the adjustment was painful. Tiffany, with her habits, her moods, her work schedule disturbed my measured peace. But I tried to be patient, realizing what she was going through. One day, about a month after she moved in, I decided to drive down to the lake to see how the plant was progressing and what condition my former home was in. Tiffany was at work that day, so I didn't tell her about my plans. It was a clear, sunny day, perfect for a trip out of town. I drove down the familiar road, looking at the fields and woods whizzing by, and thought about how strange life had gotten. A year ago, I'd had a country house I'd built with my own hands, and our relationship with my daughter that, while not perfect, was still relatively normal. Now, the house belonged to Tiffany, but it was empty, and she was living with me in a city apartment, hiding from her husband and creditors. As I drove up to the lake, the first thing that caught my eye were the huge factory structures towering above the wooded area. Metal casings, pipes, and tanks all glistened in the sun, creating a surreal contrast to the natural beauty of the lake and surrounding forests. I drove past several houses for sale. Some looked abandoned with boarded-up windows, overgrown, weedy lots. The neighborhood, once considered a prestigious country retreat, now resembled a ghost of itself. Finally, I reached my former home. It stood on a knoll, still as sturdy and solid as I had built it. But the lot was overgrown. The paint on the porch was peeling, and one of the window frames was askew. Just a few months without proper maintenance, and the house was already beginning to fall into disrepair. I pulled the car over to the curb and sat for a while, staring at the house that had once been the center of my life. This is where Elizabeth and I were happy. This is where Tiffany grew up. This is where I spent the best years of my life. Then, it shifted my gaze to the factory beyond the wooded strip. The pipes, like giant fingers, stretched toward the sky. Even from here, the noise of construction equipment could be heard. Trucks could be seen scurrying along the temporary road. Strangely, I felt no anger or bitterness, only a slight sadness, not for the house as a structure, but for the memories that were associated with it. Memories of Elizabeth, of little Tiffany, of happy summer days at the lake. I got out of the car and walked along the fence surrounding the property. The gate was unlocked. Tiffany apparently hadn't bothered leaving. I could have gone in, walked around the garden, looked in the windows, but I didn't. It was no longer my home, and there was no point in going back there. Instead, I went to the lake. The shore was deserted. No fishermen or beathers, though the day was warm and suitable for relaxing on the water. Apparently, the news about the chemical plant had scared away not only potential real estate buyers, but also ordinary vacationers. I sat on a bench by the water, looking out at the calm surface of the lake. How much time I'd spent here with Elizabeth. How many conversations we'd had sitting on this very spot. How many plans we'd made. And now it was all in the past. And yet, I didn't feel unhappy. On the contrary, over the past few months, I had found a new meaning to life, new friends, and returned to the work I loved, albeit in a limited format. Even my relationship with Tiffany, despite all the difficulties, has become, in some ways, deeper and more honest than before. Perhaps losing my home was a necessary payment for this change. Perhaps I needed to lose the material connection to the past in order to move on. Perhaps even Tiffany's betrayal was a catalyst of sorts, forcing me to evaluate my life and find a new path. I didn't know what would happen next. Would Tiffany ever be able to sell the house, or would she have to declare bankruptcy? Would Jasper come back, or was their marriage truly at an end? Whether Tiffany would stay living with me or find her own place. But I knew one thing. I would find a way to deal with any twist of fate, just like I always had. I rose from the bench and took one last look at the lake, the wooded area, the factory, and the house on the knoll. A strange mix of past and present, nature and industry, personal memories and impersonal economic interests. As I got in the car, I thought that I might never come back here again. And that was okay. Life went on in another place, in another format. And the house was just a structure of wood and stone that would eventually crumble like everything. Material in this world crumbles. On the way into town, I thought about Tiffany, about our current life together. It had been difficult, full of compromises and fits. But there was something real and honest about it, something that had been missing from our relationship before. Maybe we both had to go through betrayal, loss, disappointment to find our way back to each other. Not a perfect path, not without problems and conflict, but a path nonetheless. I haven't forgiven Tiffany completely. Some things can't be forgiven completely. But I accepted her back into my life with all her mistakes and flaws. Because she was my daughter, my flesh and blood. And because in the end, love was stronger than resentment. As I pulled up to my house, in the city, the sun was already setting, coloring the sky orange and pink. I parked the car, walked up to my floor, and opened the door. Tiffany had already gotten home from work and was cooking dinner in the kitchen. It smelled like roast meat and spices. "Daddy," she smiled when she saw me. "Where have you been?" I called, but you didn't answer. "I went to the lake," I said simply. "I wanted to see how the house was." Her smile faded. "How is it?" "It's standing," I shrugged. The pipes of the factory could already be seen above the woods. Tiffany sighed. "I guess I'll have to declare bankruptcy. There's no other way out." "Maybe," I agreed. "But it's not the end of the world. You'll start over, debt-free and Jasper-free. And no house," she added sadly. "A house is just a structure," I said. "It's the people who live in it and the relationships between them that matter." Tiffany looked at me in mild surprise, then nodded. "You're right, Daddy. As always, we ate dinner together talking about her work, my young engineers, my weekend plans. An ordinary evening of ordinary people living ordinary lives. And in that ordinariness, in that simplicity, I found a peace I hadn't experienced in a long time. Not perfect happiness, not euphoria, but peace. A sense that everything was going my way, that I was in my place, that life, despite all its complexities and twists and turns, was ultimately fair. Tiffany was washing dishes. I was wiping plates. Outside the window, the sun was setting. Someone was playing the piano in the apartment next door, and the muffled sounds of city life were coming from the street. And I thought that maybe the loss of the country house was not a tragedy, but a liberation, a release from the weight of the past, from illusions, from unnecessary attachments. Freedom rarely comes easily and painlessly. It usually comes at a price, sometimes a very high price, but it's worth it. Always worth it.